I have a list of 40 of the scariest movies ever made. This is a list that I found on IMDB. It's a pretty good list, but it's not perfect. So I'm going to sort it out with this tier ranking. Now, there is a good chance that I'm going to be talking about some of your favorite horror movies, and there's also a very good chance that my opinion is not going to be exactly the same as yours. You may feel tempted to get onto the comment section and tell me how much of an idiot I am. If you feel that temptation, please, please, please do not fight it. Let me have it. I want my opinions to be challenged, and I enjoy hearing about different perspectives and what different people got out of these movies that I enjoyed, perhaps to a lesser extent. If you like horror and you like content about opinions about horror, give this video a like. And before I say anything unfavorable about some of the movies that you love, subscribe to the channel. That is much appreciated. No intro sequence. Let's jump right in. Let's begin by taking a look at the categories. At the bottom here we have ice cream. Now, a lot of people love ice cream. And not just kids on their birthdays, but like adult people enjoy ice cream. Ice cream is essentially sugary cow milk mixed with ice. And people, they eat it, they put it on a cone. I see them in the parks and they eat it with their tongue. Like in public, like in front of the children. I think it's gross. The texture is gross. The flavor is, ugh, it's too sweet. And if you eat it too fast, it hurts your brain. I don't know why ice cream is so popular, but it is. I don't know. Human people are strange sometimes. So if I put a movie in the ice cream category, I'm throwing my hands in the air and I'm saying, I don't get it. It didn't work on me, but apparently it worked on a lot of other people. I have no idea why. It hurt my brain, but not in a good way. So that's the ice cream category. Up next, we have Three Musketeers. Now, I don't know if these still exist, but when I was a child growing up, there used to be this candy bar called Three Musketeers. And you're thinking, candy bar, that's great. And it looks like a candy bar. And it's covered with chocolate, so that's a great start. And then you take a bite, and underneath the chocolate is this foamy, gooey substance called nougat. And it's sweet, so at the first bite you're thinking, oh, that's good, that's promising. But then if you take a second bite, like the nougat, the longer it stays in your mouth, it turns into some kind of spider venom or something, and it just gets kind of nasty. And if you make it to the third bite, then you're probably going to get sick. I don't know. Three Musketeers have the form and the look of a candy bar, but they're pretty gross. But I would see them everywhere. So apparently people bought them. They're in all the supermarkets. I don't know why. They're pretty disgusting. And up next we have nachos. Now, who doesn't love nachos? I love me some nachos. Nachos are fun food. Like if you're eating nachos, you know you're going to have a good time. Like they don't serve nachos at funerals, for example. And sometimes, you know, I'll be in the mood for like a proper meal, right? And but if I'm served nachos instead of a proper meal, I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to say, hey, I want to eat with a knife and fork like an adult person. No, I'm going to eat my nachos and I'm going to have a good time. So if I put a movie there, it's because I really like it. I thought it was fun, but nachos aren't scary, really, you know. So they might keep you from sleeping at night, but that's not because of the fear. And on top we have alligators. I am terrified of alligators. Alligators are these long, flat collection of muscles covered in scales and this huge, powerful mouth with sharp teeth. And they get into the water and they hide under the water and let just their beady eyes stick out. They are terrifying. Now, I live in Europe where there are no alligators, but still I will not swim in a lake. Because you never know, like an American tourist could come and they have an alligator with them and it slips out of their pocket, goes in the lake and starts a family somehow or something. Highly unlikely, but I am not going to take that risk. In fact, I live in Latvia, and there's probably not a day that goes by that I don't, you know, look around at the park or look around the streets and make sure there are no alligators around. Like, I'm fascinated by alligators, but I don't want to be anywhere near them. So if I put a movie in this category, it's because it's legitimately scary. Okay, so let's jump in. We'll begin with 1408. This is a movie based off a short story by Stephen King. I have not read the short story. And this movie did not work on me at all. This is an ice cream movie. Definitely. 1408 is about this man. He's a writer. He's a skeptic. And he writes. He spends time in supposedly haunted locations and writes about how they're not actually haunted. And this movie does something that many horror movies do that completely turns me off, is that they present this skeptic as some kind of idiot. Like, oh, how dare he question like ghosts and haunted places? What an idiot! What a fool! And then it turns out that no, the place really is haunted, and he shouldn't have been so skeptical. So I'm watching movies like this, especially 1408, and immediately I feel like the movie is insulting me because I'm a rational thinking adult, right? And I'm happy to suspend my disbelief, to have a good time with the supernatural, but I want it to be in a world where supernatural things exist, not a movie that presents to us as if it's happening in our world. And oh, by the way, don't be such an idiot because supernatural things do exist. It's just kind of insulting, and it doesn't work on me. Plus, this movie just goes overboard with the special effects. I mean, it's supposed to be one guy in one location, which I generally like movies that are minimalistic in that sense. But if you're going to do a single location with one man, you kind of need to work on building the atmosphere and work on the subtlety. But this movie goes over the top with the special effects, so why go for a minimalist approach if you're just going to give me blockbuster effects on top of it? Kind of defeats the purpose. Didn't work on me. Next up, we have The Fly by David Cronenberg, who is my favorite filmmaker of all time. Not my favorite movie of his, The Fly, but still a very good movie. The special effects are excellent. The performances are excellent. It's not scary though, so I'm gonna put this in the nachos category because it's definitely a good time without being scary. Incidentally, the short story that this movie is based on, The Fly, is one of the scariest short stories I've ever read. I think it's just brilliantly constructed. Moving on, The Evil Dead 2. Now this movie is the definition or the epitome of nachos, because this movie is a blast. It has fantastic performances. It's pretty silly at times, but in a fun way. And there's some laughs in it. There's quite a bit of gore. It's not scary, but it's a good time. Nachos. Next up, we have The Serpent and the Rainbow. Now this is a strange choice to make a movie out of. The Serpent and the Rainbow is based on a nonfiction book by Wade Davis. Wade Davis was a botanist from Harvard, and he was working on a project to treat Alzheimer's. So he was sent to Haiti to retrieve the recipe for the voodoo potion that voodoo priests use to turn people into indentured servants, really, or zombies. And so it has an effect on this poison or this concoction that they make, and they serve people in their rituals. It has an effect on the brain, and they would like to study this effect. So he went down there to get the recipe. So it's a very interesting book, but it's there isn't really any narrative arc to it. It's really an exploration of Haitian politics and the Haitian society and how it was constructed, and gets into botany and talks about different legumes, different nuts and blowfish and all that. It's really interesting, but it's not really a story. There isn't a narrative arc to it. So they chose that to make a movie out of. So unsurprisingly, the story in this movie is kind of all over the place. It doesn't really work. So I'm going to put it in the ice cream category. The concept could work, a botanist goes to Haiti to try to get the recipe for their rituals. But they should have just created their own story and not try to make that nonfiction book into a horror movie. That was a strange choice, and it didn't quite work out, in my opinion. Up next, we have Halloween, which is a masterpiece of horror. I love the minimalism of this movie. The score, the sound, the theme to it is spectacular. It's one of the best themes in all of horror. And I love just the minimalist concept. It's a shape that's stalking this woman. And the performances are great. Jamie Lee Curtis, Donald Pleasance. Yeah, Halloween's a masterpiece for a reason. Next, we have The Autopsy of Jane Doe. So this is about a father and son who work in a morgue. They get this body brought to them, this Jane Doe, and they have to conduct an autopsy on her to find out what happened. And as they conduct the autopsy, they discover strange things about her anatomy, and strange things begin to happen in the morgue. The first half of this movie is excellent. It really builds suspense very well. It's an intriguing concept, and then halfway through the movie, it makes a decision that I thought was very strange, and I'm surprised that they got away with it. I think this movie came out in 2016. I don't know if they could get away with that choice today, because essentially they rewrote history and took the victims of a historical event and made them the bad people in history, which is pretty rude, pretty insulting. I don't get morally outraged easily. I did find this movie problematic and insulting, though, on that front. And after this choice, the second half of the movie, it just falls apart. It falls apart. So that is pretty much the definition of Three Musketeers, right? Next up, we have Alien by Ridley Scott. This is a masterpiece of horror. This movie, Alien, is pretty much created the template, or is the template for this kind of horror in space or on a spaceship. We don't know who to trust. We don't know who's human. There's a predator loose on board that we can't see, so everyone feels like they're being hunted because they are being hunted. There's a cat in peril. There's a lot to be scared of in that movie. Next up, we have the Alfred Hitchcock classic Psycho. Now, this is a great movie. Talk about beautiful scores. This score by Bernard Herrmann is exquisite. I'm going to put this in the nachos category because I do think it's an excellent movie, but there's nothing really scary about it. The book by Robert Bloch that this movie is based on, it made my list of top 10 horror books of all time. Very different experience from the movie. The movie is Hollywood and glamorous, and everybody is beautiful, and the sets are beautiful too. But the book is dirty and nasty and sweaty and smells bad and it's swampy. It's a very different experience, and I like them both. Next up, we have Jaws. Jaws is the summer blockbuster, which I should put in the nachos category, but to be honest with you, I mean, when this came out, I mean, it terrified everyone, and it made people like myself when I was a kid afraid to go into the water, like legitimately. So maybe it doesn't have quite the same impact today, but I can't take away from the impact that it had when it came out. It's still a very good movie and great score, and the opening scene is spectacular. I'm going to put that in the alligator category. Next up, we have Wreck, which is a found footage movie, I think from Spain, if I'm not mistaken. It's basically in a high-rise apartment complex. There's a zombie outbreak or some kind of viral outbreak, and there's a film crew there to film it. So I saw this movie, it came out when it came out, which was pretty much when found footage was past its prime. Like, I was done with found footage, and this movie kind of confirmed that. So I do think that there were some good scenes in it. I just wish that they had shot it like a traditional movie instead of going for the found footage angle, which was worn out by then. I'm going to put it in the Three Musketeers because there are some good scenes. It's too bad that it's found footage. Next up, we have Poltergeist. Now, I remember seeing this movie when I was a kid, and I found it very cool, very interesting. And there was even one scene that I found particularly scary. It's when there's the thunderstorm, and they're counting down to see how quickly the storm is approaching, and then the tree shoots through the window. I jumped. I thought that was pretty scary. Plus, there's that little clown doll. That was pretty creepy. I did see this movie again recently, and in my opinion, it did not hold up at all. I'd forgotten how zany that final act was. I think this could probably still work on young people, though. I think it is for young people, but it's a good movie for if you want to turn a young person into a horror fan. That might work. Next up, Children of the Corn, another movie based on Stephen King's short story. And I remember seeing this when it came out too, and I thought it was very cool. I saw it again recently, and yeah, it didn't hold up. Not unsurprisingly. I think this was the first movie that took the U.S. Protestantism, Christian fundamentalism, and used that as the backdrop for the evil, or used them as the, or used that religion as the villain. In the 1970s, the Catholic Church received that treatment quite extensively. But here with Children of the Corn, I feel like that's when U.S. Protestantism became a trope, or started to become a trope in the horror universe. So a couple, they're on a drive through Nebraska. They stop off at this small town, and all the adults are gone because the kids killed them, which is a great concept. It does fall apart at the end, though. Yeah, it falls apart. I'm going to say a Three Musketeers movie. It has a cool concept, but it just doesn't hold up. Next up, we have The Omen. I think that this movie is a masterpiece of filmmaking. Iconic score, one of the best scenes, one of the best opening scenes in all of horror, a gut punch ending. And then there's that really creepy scene with that woman on the balcony. This is all for you, Damien. I'm doing this for you. I would be tempted to put it in the alligator category, but it's really not a scary horror movie. It's just really well done and interesting. Next up, we have The Babadook. This is a movie that a lot of people loved. I'm not one of those people, unfortunately. I watched this movie with my girlfriend at the time, and she likes to watch movies, so we would spend, many evenings watching like 1970s Italian dramas or French comedies, and I was not into that. So I decided I would try to convert her into a horror fan. So I heard good things about The Babadook, so we watched The Babadook, and it did not work. She was not converted. I do like the aesthetic of the movie. This is a single mother and her young son, and they have a book that they're reading from, and the book has a character called the Babadook that threatens to come get them, and then maybe it does come to get them in real life. So this movie is not shot in black and white, but there's very little color in the house that they have. So it does play well with the black and white book that they're reading, kind of blends the two aesthetics. So I thought that worked well. I thought the relationship between the mother and the son worked well because there was something a little bit odd, a little bit off about it, which was intriguing. But halfway through the movie, it just kind of lost its momentum. It had several endings too. I remember thinking, "Oh, finally this movie is over. Okay, good." But then it kept going, and it gave us another ending and a third ending. So it did not work to convert my girlfriend into a horror fan, and after we watched that, I was not allowed to pick the movie for the rest of the month. So I had to watch a lot of 1970s Italian dramas. So thanks a lot, The Babadook. I'm going to put you in the ice cream category, which is harsh. But actually, no, I'm going to change my mind because even though I didn't enjoy it, I was watching it with my ex-girlfriend, and she was quite a bit of a killjoy anyway. So I think probably my not enjoying it, probably a lot of it was her fault. Moving on, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre by Tobe Hooper. This is one disturbing book. I'm going to put it in the alligator category. I've seen it once. I don't think I will watch it again. It was a tough watch. It's just gritty and grimy. They shot it in the sweltering heat, and you can tell because the actors are all sweaty and uncomfortable, and you can feel it. And there are long passages of this movie that have no dialogue, just sounds and just people moving, and it's unsettling. It's a tough watch, but if you want to be disturbed, yeah, that's a disturbing one. The Ring, the American version, the only version I've seen of this movie. This is people watch a VHS tape, and then 7 days later they die unless they do something. So this is a young couple. They get together and they try to solve the mystery behind it. It is a pretty silly story, actually, but there are some nice creepy images to it. I'll be honest with you, I did have fun watching this movie, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. Actually, I am a little bit ashamed, but I'll admit it anyway. I had a good time with this movie. Although I do recognize, I mean, you have to turn your brain off to watch it, but sometimes that's what movies are for. They're to help you turn your brain off and just enjoy yourself. Next up, Friday the 13th. Now, this movie is very important to the horror catalog. Kind of cemented the template for a slasher, and for the many slashers that were to follow. However, it's not a movie that holds up really well, to be honest with you. It's quite poorly paced. I mean, there are long stretches of it that are excruciatingly boring. So I am tempted to put it in the ice cream because it's really not a good movie. But it is iconic. It is important. You know what? As important as it is, it doesn't hide the fact that it's not really very good. So I'm going to put it in the ice cream. Next up, we have Child's Play. I love me some Chucky. This is a killer doll that tries to kill a kid and his mother. And this is a very good time at the movies. Not scary, but a lot of fun. Up next, we have Barbarian. And this is a movie that I'd heard good things about, so I checked it out. And I do not agree with the good things that I heard. The movie is presented in sort of vignettes or chapters that are loosely connected. So it's almost like watching an anthology movie, except it really does come together as one story. However, the final act, it just fell apart. The final act defied the laws of physics, turned into nonsense. Yeah, I can't give it a higher ranking than Ice Cream. Next up, we have Sleepaway Camp. This is a iconic slasher. I think it's one of the better slasher movies ever made. There's nothing scary about it, though. So I'm going to put it in the nacho category. It has an excellent opening scene where these two kids are swimming in a lake, and there's a freak boating accident, which is quite a daring choice for a movie to depict scenes of freak boating. But yeah, it's kids at a camp, and there's a killer that's killing everyone, so good times. Next up, we have A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, this was one of the first horror movies I ever saw. and I had a blast with it. I mean, Freddy Krueger is such a great villain because he's creative and he's imaginative. He's not just creative in the way he kills people, but he actually creates worlds for his victims and for us, right? In their dreams, he reshapes their dreams and gets quite creative with it. So, yeah, a lot of fun. And I actually found that this was, there are a few scenes that were quite scary. When I think it's Tina who is killed by being dragged around the ceiling. That's pretty trippy. I actually rewatched this movie a few years back and it definitely holds up, I think. So, alligator material. Next up, we have Bug, which is a movie by William Friedkin, who we'll see later on again. This movie was based on a play, and it definitely shows. I mean, we have essentially two characters in one location, this hotel room, and it's shot and acted very much like a play. Does not translate that well to the screen, though. I feel like something is off with the pacing. It just escalates too quickly, and it just doesn't work, unfortunately. The two performers was Ashley Judd and Michael Shannon. Usually they're quite good. I don't think they really give good performances in this movie, I'm afraid. Oh, a swing and a miss. Next up, we have the Blair Witch Project. Now, I saw this movie in the theaters when it came out in '99, I want to say. The movie, the theater was packed, and everybody had a good time, as did I. And there's nothing really scary about this movie, I think, until the very, very end and the final shot. And I think it's probably the best final shot of any horror movie. I can't think of another final shot that's better than that one. I'm not talking about final scene, but final shot. So because of that final shot, it's going to go into the alligators category. I don't know how well this movie holds up because it was imitated so many times after it came out, but I do have fond memories of seeing it in the theaters and being freaked out. Up next, Cabin Fever. And this is a movie that I loved. Love me some Cabin Fever. It's a bunch of young kids who rent a cabin out in the woods. And one of them gets infected with some kind of virus. And then the horror begins. And what's great about this is you can't see the threat. It's just inside you, or it's in the air, or it's in the water. It's there, but you can't see it. And it just creates some excellent body horror and gore. Lots of gore. Yeah. Unsettling movie that I quite enjoyed. Up next, we have Drag Me to Hell, which sounds like a movie starring Nicolas Cage, but it's not a movie starring Nicolas Cage. Actually, a horror movie starring Justin Long. It's about a young woman who has an eating disorder. She's about to get married, and she's nervous about that. I think this movie just went over my head. I mean, it's from the early 2000s, and it just looks so clean and looks so glossy. It doesn't really look like a horror movie. And it's about a gypsy curse too, which who's afraid of a gypsy curse? You know, not me. So, yeah, it didn't work on me. Up next, we have Saw, the original of the franchise. Saw is a movie. The first time I saw it, I didn't quite like it. I did revisit it a few years later, and the second viewing, I liked it a lot. And this movie is important to horror because it came out in the early 2000s, and it really transitioned horror away from the serial killer police procedurals, which had dominated the 90s, and kind of brought back more traditional horror. Although Saw is a police procedural, the first one is, but it leans heavily into the horror aspects, into the gore, and it created a whole new generation of horror fans. So it's very important to the horror universe for that. And I also think it's quite a disturbing and well done movie. Up next, we have Dawn of the Dead by George R. Romeo. This is a zombie outbreak and a group of survivors. They barricade themselves in a shopping center. And I think this is one of his best movies. Actually, this and Night of the Living Dead are his masterpieces. This is excellent. I love the zombie subgenre. We have survivalist aspects. We also have elements of isolation. We've got nice gore going on. There's a lot to like. And this is one of the best ones in the subgenre. Up next, Get Out. Now, when I saw the trailer to this movie, I was thinking, oh, so this is a reimagining of the Stepford Wives. And then I saw the movie, and yeah, that's pretty much my takeaway of it. And the Stepford Wives is one of the first horror movies I ever saw, along with Nightmare on Elm Street and Alien. And the Stepford Wives was a big part of my childhood. I loved the movie. The book by Ira Levin is one of my favorite horror books of all time, too. So I did not react well to my childhood being reimagined, being played with. And also, I think I might have reacted better if it had been recognized as a Stepford Wives remake or reboot or reimagining, but it kind of wasn't. And also, it received a lot of hype. I can appreciate if younger moviegoers for whom the Stepford Wives is not that important, if they saw this movie and really enjoyed it, I can appreciate that. I get it. But for me, it was just too similar to Stepford Wives and not as good. And I didn't appreciate my childhood being reimagined. So, ice cream cone. Up next, An American Werewolf in London. I remember seeing this when it came out. I remember thinking it was great. And I watched it again a few years back. And I did not have the same enthusiasm for it. The special effects, like the transformation scenes and the makeup for the dead bodies, or the ghosts that come back as rotting corpses, the makeup and special effects still hold up. They're excellent. The story itself, I mean, there's like a love story or a romance that's forced in there. It's completely unbelievable and distracting. So it's not as good as I had remembered it to be, but there's still a lot to like about it. So, Three Musketeers. Up next, Hellraiser by Clive Barker. I think this is another masterpiece of horror. I love the creativity that went into this work. I love the box. I love the lament configuration and the mixture of pain and sex. All worked very well on me. The novel or the novella it's based off of, The Hellbound Heart, is also one of my favorite horror books. I think I prefer the movie, though, to be honest with you. The image of those chains shooting through the air. Excellent. Up next, we have Frailty. Frailty is a tough one. I think it suffers from the same problem as 1408 does. It presents a story as if it's taking place in our world, but then it introduces supernatural elements in a way that kind of discredits the movie. I think that there is a twist at the end which I think works, but I did find its treatment of the supernatural problematic. It's introduced at the expense of the psychological horror that it was building up, so it kind of undoes a lot of what it was creating, but it's still an effective ending. It's a flawed movie, but not a bad one. So, Three Musketeers. Up next, we have Hereditary. Now, the first half of this movie I thought was excellent. It was super tense. My goodness. That scene where they go to the party, and then he has to drive his sister home, and then he has to go inside and have a conversation with his parents. My goodness, the tension. Unbelievable. One of the most tense movies I'd ever seen. And then the second half of the movie just completely falls apart. So that's pretty much the definition of the Three Musketeers. Hereditary, it does that thing that some movies do where it has to explain to the viewer what they've just seen, which is kind of insulting and just kind of rips you from the story. I remember that happened in The Joker, for example, where at the end they flash back through the movie and explain things you've already seen that you already understood. And Hereditary does a bit of that as well. And in the final act, it just feels super rushed. It feels like all the effort and focus went into the first half of the movie, because that's spectacular. Up next, we have Us. Us is a movie I had a lot of fun with. I saw this movie with a group of people, and after the movie, the movie sparked some interesting conversations. I had a good time with it. You can't really think that much about it because there are some gaping plot holes in it, but that's okay because I think the aim was to entertain, and it definitely entertained for me. Next up, we have The Shining, which I think is arguably the best horror movie ever made. Arguably the scariest. There's a scene in there where the young boy, Danny Torrance, he's riding his big wheel through the corridors of the hotel, and the sound design is gorgeous. The wheel is hitting the wood surface and it rattles, and then the wheel hits the carpet and it's muffled, and that goes on for like 3 or 4 minutes. That's all that happens, and just by the sound design alone, it was incredibly tense. And there's some iconic images from that movie. Spectacular. I won't say anything about the book because I don't want to lose subscribers. So I'll just say that I thought the movie was excellent. Next up, we have The Amityville Horror from 1979. So this is an example, much like 1408, where it introduces the supernatural and treats skeptics like idiots. Here with Amityville Horror, it's again a haunted house story, but it takes place in a world where haunted houses are a thing, right? So it doesn't treat skeptics like idiots. And it also is kind of a hybrid true crime and supernatural haunting story. And I think it balances or blends the two together quite well. There's nothing really scary about this, but I think it's very well done. And just that the house itself is beautiful. It's just in a creepy way. So iconic movie, and I think deservedly so. I haven't read the book, but I have heard nothing but bad things about it. I've heard it's quite terrible, but the movie I quite enjoyed. Next up, we have Goodnight Mommy. So here we have two young twin boys, and their mother, she gets some reconstructive surgery done, like a nose job. So she returns home bandaged, and the kids, they think that their mother has been taken and is being replaced with this replicant. So it's a very cool premise, and I had a good time with this. I had a good time with this movie. There's a twist at the end which may or may not work. It didn't really work on me, but I enjoyed enough of the movie to leave the experience with a good feeling about the movie. A few years after this film, these filmmakers, a few years after the success of Goodnight Mommy, they came out with a movie called The Lodge, which I thought was amazing. And similar to Goodnight Mommy in that it's just a few characters in one location. And people do not talk about The Lodge. I think it's one of the best horror movies I've seen in probably the past 10 years, maybe. Love me The Lodge. I think it's a better movie than Goodnight Mommy, but it's not on this list. Up next, we have The Visit by M. Night Shyamalan. Now, this is a found footage movie that came out well past the prime of found footage. But I liked this movie. It worked on me. It's again, it's a minimalist. It's essentially one location. You have four, maybe five characters, and there's a lot of creepy things going on here. So it's not scary, but it is unsettling and entertaining. So nachos. Up next we have The Descent. The Descent is probably the scariest movie I have ever seen. We have a group of people who go spelunking, exploring this cave, and they get lost, and then they discover that they're not alone in this cave system. It is extremely claustrophobic. I mean, I was suffocating watching this, and the creature design is very well done. Up next, we have The Exorcist, again by William Friedkin. Now, I've said it 3 times already in this video. I'll say it again. The Exorcist was one of the first horror movies I ever saw, and I was very young. It came on television, and normally my sister and I were not allowed to watch television unsupervised, but we had a guest staying with us for the week, a friend of the family, and he was in the living room watching The Exorcist, so I just walked in and sat down next to him, and I remember being freaked out, like legitimately scared. And this friend of the family, he thought it was hilarious that a little kid was scared of this movie. So I don't really remember much about the movie. I remember just watching it, being afraid, and having this stranger that I didn't know, having him laugh at me. Now, I did watch the movie later as an adult, and the scares didn't really hold up. The makeup and special effects don't really hold up by today's standards. Plus, it's about demon possession, which is pretty silly. But it's still a well-made film. It's still well done, with some great performances and some interesting subtext. I would be tempted to put it in the nachos category, but I cannot take its legacy for granted. I mean, this movie terrorized a whole generation of moviegoers. So for that, and it terrorized me as a young kid. So for that, it deserves its spot in alligators. And we will end with The Wicker Man, the original from the 70s. This is a police constable who goes off to an island off the coast of Scotland, I believe. It might be the coast of England. I don't remember exactly. And he's there to investigate the disappearance of a young girl. I thought this movie was excellent. I love the way it was shot. The location is beautiful and is intriguing. This movie is a borderline musical. Like, the characters will just burst into song randomly. And the actual story and the construction of the story is very well done. I think this is a horror masterpiece. And it's not the kind of movie that will scare you while you're watching it, but it will plant some seeds where you think about it and it could scare you after. What do you think of the list? What do you think of my ranking? I always enjoy connecting with you in the comment section. Thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next video.